morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Today, we're going to continue our study of the Ten Commandments. We're going to be doing this by looking at the fifth commandment, which can be found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. And it says, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." Now, unfortunately, when we read this commandment, our mind might suddenly fill up with images of disrespectful children. These days, it is not at all uncommon to see a young child screaming or even cursing directly at their mother or father. All right, you'll be shopping at Walmart, and you'll see a parent pushing their child around in a shopping cart while that child continues to make the biggest, ugliest scene. They're yelling at the top of their lungs, they're hitting their mother or throwing things at her, and sometimes that child will even be using profanity.
Buy me something now!
And a lot of times you hardly see any correction or any discipline coming from the parent in response to this young child's atrocious behavior. But children dishonoring their parents is definitely a problem that we have in the society that we live in today. But what exactly does it mean to honor our father and mother? Well, when we're a child, a big part of honoring our parents is obeying them, right? Following their rules or doing whatever it is that they tell us to do. The Apostle Paul tells us in Colossians chapter 3, verse 20, "Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord." But honoring our parents is more than just obeying them. Okay? It's also about respecting them, showing them the proper respect, not only in our words, but also with our actions. And it's about acknowledging or recognizing their position or their rank. Now, we may not always agree with our parents, but we still have to respect their position. And when we learn to respect our parents at a young age, it makes it so much easier to respect the other authority figures that pop up in our lives later on, such as our employers or members of law enforcement. And not only that, but honoring our parents also helps us to learn how to honor God Himself. When we honor, respect, and obey our earthly mother and father, then it helps us to make that transition and helps us to pass on those traits toward our Heavenly Father. So what if I have bad parents? Fortunately for my wife and I, neither one of us ever had that problem, all right? But I know a lot of people do, all right? A lot of people have parents that are abusive, either physically or verbally. Some have parents who are alcoholics or who are addicted to drugs, and many, many parents out there have absolutely no respect for God and His Son Jesus Christ. And this is reflected in the way that they conduct themselves as parents. So what if I have a parent like that? Would I still be obligated to honor them? Well, the easiest answer to that question is yes. Regardless of the many, many faults they may have, they would still be your mother and father. And you would still have to respect and honor that position that they hold. But that doesn't mean that you have to imitate their ungodly behavior. All right, honoring our parents does not mean that we have to support them in their sins, and we certainly should not allow their sinful behavior to affect us and our spiritual walk with Christ. But yes, we would still have to respect and honor their position by continuing to love them, continuing to pray for them, and as difficult as it may be, we would still honor them by forgiving them, just as Christ has forgiven us. Probably one of the best examples in the Bible of a person respecting someone else's position, okay, even in the most extreme circumstances, was the story of David and King Saul. Now, King Saul was tracking David, and he wanted to kill him. But twice, okay, 2 times, David had the opportunity to turn the tables on Saul and kill him instead. Now, we can only imagine the temptation that David must have felt when even his own men were urging him to kill Saul. But David refused to do it. All right, and in 1 Samuel 24, verse 6, we read why. David says to his men in this verse, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." Even with his life in danger, David would not dishonor that position of authority that God had placed Saul in, just as we have to respect that position of our father and mother. But as Christians, one thing that we cannot forget is that we are all held accountable to an authority that is much, much higher than both of our parents put together. And that is God himself. We're told in Acts chapter 5, verse 29, that we ought to obey God rather than men. Okay, he should be honored above anyone else. And all of our decisions should be based upon his instruction and his teaching. So what happens when we become grown adults? I mean, does the fact that we're no longer children mean that we also no longer have to honor our parents? Genesis chapter 2, verse 24 says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife." Now, even though leaving the nest may not always mean getting married, all right, like it talks about in this verse, still, at some point, most of us do decide that it's time to pack up our things and get out on our own. All right, in fact, for some of us who might be somewhat lacking in self-motivation, sometimes our parents actually have to make that decision for us, that it's time for us to go. But this is where we make that transition, okay, into full-blown adulthood. All right, we now have adult responsibilities. You know, we're expected to make adult decisions, and we can no longer hide behind that minor status. So once we've reached that point in our lives, is it still just as important for us to honor our father and our mother? Well, the answer to that question is yes, but not exactly in the same way that we did when we were children. When we become adults, honoring our parents is no longer as much about strict obedience to mom and dad. All right, because we're adults now. We're expected to make our own decisions, and we can no longer rely solely on them to tell us what to do anymore. And once we have reached that point in our lives, honoring our parents becomes more about loving them, all right, showing them our love and appreciation and acknowledging all those sacrifices that they have made for us through the years. You know, I know sometimes I think back on my high school days and realize just how much thanks I actually owe my parents for all that I put them through during those years. But as adults, we can also honor our parents by spending time with them. All right, even if you live 1,000 miles away from them, pick up a phone, all right, and call them. And make it a point to do this on a regular basis. As adults, we should also be mindful to make sure that our parents are well taken care of in their old age. All right, this is also another way that we honor them. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 4 tells us, "But if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home, and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God." All right, so we honor our parents in this way by making sure that their needs are met, just as they made sure that our needs were met, all right, when we were children. And as we continue to serve our mother and father in this way, we are also serving God and showing honor to Him. I want to end this video today by adding a personal message. Now, my wife just recently lost her father. Now, thankfully, he was a good Christian man. All right, and it was just his time to go home and be with the Lord. My wife also has 3 sisters, and my father-in-law and my mother-in-law were great parents to all 4 of these girls. Okay, Proverbs 22, verse 6 directs our parents to train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, even though the pronoun he is the one used in this verse, obviously we know that this applies just as much to the raising and upbringing of daughters as well. And this biblical guideline was certainly reflected in the way that my in-laws raised and brought up their 4 girls. Okay, they chose to bring these girls up in a Christian home, instill in them Christian values, and would raise them to be women of good Christian character. All right, so these girls knew about the 5th commandment early on in their lives, and they would spend their entire lives, all 4 of them, would spend their entire lives abiding by this commandment. In the long period of time that I've known my wife and her 3 sisters, the amount of love and respect that I've seen these girls show their parents is highly admirable, and unfortunately highly unusual for this day and time that we live in. And yet, when my father-in-law passed away, my wife, in the midst of her grief, would still allow those little seeds of doubt to enter into her mind. All right, doubt as to whether or not she honored him enough. Okay, whether or not she spent enough time with him, and whether or not she told him that she loved him enough times. Now, this was a woman who would make frequent phone calls to her parents and pay them frequent visits. She would constantly tell them how much she loved them, and she would always be there for them without hesitation whenever they needed her. All right, just as they were always there for us when we needed them. But she still questioned whether it was enough. Now, can you imagine how my wife and her 3 sisters would have felt if they had not spent their lives honoring their father? Too many people wait until it's too late to realize that they have not obeyed this fifth commandment. All right, a parent of theirs passes away, and then that pain and that grief is 10 times more devastating for them, because they have to live with the knowledge that they did not love, honor, and respect that parent the way that they should have. Don't wait until it's too late. All right, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Exodus 20, verse 12. Thanks for watching, and God bless.